Welcome to the Holy Unraveling, where we stop pretending we're fine and start inviting God into the messy middle. I'm Silvia Farag, therapist, wife, mother. Here, we talk about what no one else wants to, the pain, the fears, the unraveling, because I believe that God often begins the deepest transformation right where things fall apart. If you listened to the last episode, we talked about how negative thoughts shape our lives, how what we repeatedly tell ourselves doesn't just stay in our head, but quietly becomes the lens through which we see ourselves, others, and even God. Today, I want to take us one step further, because awareness alone, while really important, isn't freedom. Freedom begins when we realize this truth. You are not your thoughts. Not every thought you have is true. Not every thought you have is wise, and not every thought you have deserves your agreement. I'm going to set the stage with a story. I have a married friend who I deeply respect, brilliant, thoughtful. Someone who once shaped my own words long before I trusted them myself. They influence me in ways they don't even know. And we don't see eye to eye on this one thing. They believe that talking openly, often, public to mutual friends about marriage struggles is purging, so to speak. They say that saying it out loud is release, that venting is how pressure leaves the system. And I understand the instincts. Pain wants air. But here's where I quietly disagree, because not everything that feels like release is actually relief. From a neuroscience standpoint, repeated complaining doesn't drain pain. It trains the brain. Let me explain. When we rehearse the same grievances over and over, because most likely things are not changing, especially in an unsafe or even unstructured space, we strengthen neural pathways of resentment, not resolution. The brain doesn't hear, I'm just venting. It hears, this matters, store it, reinforce it. And that's the thing about resentment. It can feel really good, like this righteous indignation. Every retelling becomes a rehearsal, and every complaint deepens that groove. And slowly, without realizing it, we stop processing and start practicing the story. This is how resentment becomes a loop. And spiritually, I hold something even more sobering. Some thoughts are sacred. They are not meant for a crowd. They are not meant for casual consumption. Most people, good people, could misuse what they're given, not because they are cruel, but because they are untrained. They'll side, they'll judge, they'll remember what you're trying to forget, and they are certainly not unbiased. And suddenly, what was once a private struggle becomes a public identity. In both psychology and the spiritual life, healing requires containment. That's why therapy matters. That's why a spiritual father matters. That's why wise mentorship exists, because those spaces are designed not to echo your pain, but to rewire it, to interrupt the pattern, to name the thought, to challenge that narrative, to gently, repeatedly lead the mind somewhere new. Rewiring doesn't happen through exposure alone. It happens through guided truth. And here's the part I really want to say clearly, without defensiveness and without superiority. I respect my friend deeply. They are not careless. They are not unwise. Like I said, they are someone who helped shape me, someone who taught me to write more honestly, more precisely. We simply disagree about where the pain belongs. And maybe that's part of maturity, learning that love doesn't require agreement and disagreement doesn't require distance. But for me, this remains true. Not every thought deserves a microphone. I'm aware of the irony of that statement as I speak into the mic, sharing my thoughts. But some thoughts deserve a sanctuary, because what we repeatedly speak, we eventually believe. And what we believe, we begin to live. And that is the unraveling worth paying attention to. Most of us are never taught how to relate to our thoughts. We are taught to believe them, argue with them, obey them, or feel ashamed of them. But rarely were we taught how to observe them. And that's a problem. because the brain produces thousands of thoughts a day, many of them automatic, reactive, and rooted in old experiences and wounds rather than present reality. Your mind is busy. That doesn't mean it's always right. Here's what neuroscience helps us understand. Your brain's primary job is not to tell the truth. Its job is to keep you safe. That means your brain is constantly scanning for threat, predicting outcomes, and filling in gaps, often based on past pain, not current facts. So when a thought pops up like, I'm failing, my marriage is awful, this always happens, something bad is coming, I should be further along by now, that thought may feel authoritative, but it's just often familiar. Familiar does not mean factual. Automatic thoughts are fast. Discernment is slow. And without intention, we confuse the loudest voice with the truest one. Here's where it gets personal. When a thought repeats long enough, we stop hearing it as a sentence and start hearing it as who we are. I'm anxious. I'm too much. I'm behind. I'm bad at relationships. But notice what just happened. A thought quietly became your identity. And the moment that happens, shame enters the room. Because now you're not wrestling with an idea, you're defending a self-concept. Let me ask you something gently. What thought has been following you for years that you've never actually questioned? Not fought, not rebuked, just questioned. Where's this thought coming from? One of the most powerful shifts we can make, clinically, spiritually, and emotionally, is learning to create space between ourselves and our thoughts. So instead of, I'm failing, we practice, I'm having the thought that I'm failing. The tiny shift matters more than it sounds. I know it doesn't sound like much, but now that thought is something you're experiencing, not something you are. You are the observer, not the content. And from that place, choice becomes possible. This isn't new wisdom. Scripture tells us to take every thought captive, not because thoughts are evil, but because they are influential. The early church often spoke about watchfulness, nepsis, over the heart and mind, not suppression, not panic, but discernment. Remember that slow discernment. Not every thought comes from truth, and not every thought comes from God, and not every thought deserves your obedience. Spiritual maturity isn't having perfect thoughts, it's learning which ones to listen to. Here's something I want to say clearly. The voice that shames, rushes, condemns, or despairs is not the voice of God. God convicts, but he doesn't crush. God invites, but he doesn't terrorize. If a thought pulls you towards hopelessness, isolation, or self-contempt, it's not holy, no matter how convincing it sounds. Let's make this practical. I love to give you tools. Here are a simple few that you could use today. Name the thought. I'm noticing the thought that. And then ask gently, is this thought helpful right now? Is this thought true, or is it just familiar? You can write these down so you could notice the pattern, and writing is cathartic. What would I say to someone if they were thinking this right now? That same thought, what would you say to someone you loved? And if prayer is a part of your life, this can be as simple as, Lord, help me see this clearly. Not urgently, just honestly. Over time, when you stop immediately agreeing with every thought, something shifts. You become less reactive, less hijacked, more grounded. Not because the thoughts stop coming, but because they stop running the show. Healing doesn't mean silence in the mind, it means leadership. Before we go, I want to say this gently, especially if you're listening late at night or driving or folding the laundry or sitting with a heaviness you can't quite name. You're not broken because your mind is loud. You are not failing because your thoughts feel relentless. And you are not weak because you believed some of them for a long time. You're human. And your mind learned what it needed to survive. But survival is not the same as truth. And protection is not the same as direction. You don't need to silence those thoughts tonight. You don't need to conquer them. You don't even need to fix them. You just need to stop handing them the authority that they never asked for, but quietly look and ask yourself, where is it coming from? Healing often begins with something very small, a pause, a breath, a whisper saying, I notice this, instead of saying, this is who I am. That moment right there is leadership. That is strength. That's the beginning of freedom. So if nothing else, carry this with you. You are not your thoughts. You are the one God entrusted to tend them, to prune them. And that work, slow, sacred, imperfect, is holy. Until we meet again, be gentle with your mind, stay awake to what you're rehearsing, and remember, unraveling isn't falling apart, it's becoming free. If this show in any way has resonated with you, I'm asking you to consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who may feel trapped in their own dialogue. And if you're feeling really generous, leaving a review on Apple or Spotify, YouTube, this makes such a difference, more than I realized before I started doing this. Thank you.